Some marriages don't end with divorce papers. Some end at the edge of a cliff. The wind screamed across Blackthorn Ridge hard enough to shake the pine trees and drown out the ocean crashing 200 feet below. Rain slammed against the rocks in cold silver sheets. Victoria Hale could barely breathe. Her white cashmere coat clung to her skin, heavy with water, while her wedding ring cut into her finger like a blade made of ice. 31 years old. Married for 6 years to one of the most powerful real estate CEOs in California. And standing 3 inches away from death. Damien, she whispered, her voice shaking as thunder rolled across the sky. Damien Crawford stood 10 feet away near the headlights of the black Range Rover, one hand inside the pocket of his charcoal overcoat, the other holding a glass of bourbon like this was just another business dinner gone wrong. Calm, perfect, untouchable. The rain slid down his face without changing his expression. Beside him stood Sabrina Vale in a cream-colored designer trench coat, her blonde hair tucked neatly beneath a silk scarf worth more than most people's rent. She didn't look nervous. She looked annoyed, like Victoria was ruining the evening. "You said this trip was about fixing us," Victoria said, backing away from the cliff edge one careful step at a time. Mud slipped beneath her heels. "It was," Damien answered quietly. His voice carried almost no emotion. That terrified her more than if he had screamed. The wind ripped through the canyon again. Victoria looked at him the same way drowning people look at shorelines. Desperate, confused, still hoping. 6 years, she said. "I stood beside you through everything." Damien stared at her in silence for a long moment before taking a slow sip from his glass. "And that," he finally said, "was your biggest mistake." Sabrina folded her arms tighter against the storm. "Damien, we should go," she muttered impatiently. Someone could drive by. Victoria's stomach twisted. Not because of Sabrina. Not because of the rain. Because she suddenly understood why Damien had chosen this place. No cameras. No witnesses. No guardrails. Blackthorn Ridge had a 70-foot drop straight into the Pacific. Accidents happened here every year. Her pulse hammered so hard she could hear it over the thunder. "The insurance policy," she whispered. Damien's eyes flickered for half a second. Confirmation. Victoria took another shaky step backward. Gravel shifted beneath her feet. Her breathing collapsed into panic. "You planned this." Damien walked toward her slowly, polished shoes crunching against wet stone. "Victoria," he said softly, almost kindly, "you were never supposed to make this difficult." Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. The world blurred silver and black. "I loved you." For the first time all night, Damien actually looked tired. "I know." Then lightning split across the sky. Victoria's heel slid off the edge. Her body lurched sideways. A scream tore from her throat as she lost balance near the cliffside drop. Instinct exploded through her. Her hand reached out blindly through the rain. Damien caught her wrist. For one impossible second, she believed he would save her. His grip tightened around her hand while thunder shook the mountain. Victoria looked up at her husband, trembling above the empty darkness below. "Please," she whispered. The wedding ring slipped loose from her finger. Damien stared directly into her eyes as the diamond band disappeared into the storm beneath them. Then his fingers slowly opened. Victoria fell into the darkness while Sabrina covered her mouth in shock, and the sound of the ocean swallowed everything. 3 months earlier, Victoria Hale still believed expensive smiles could save a dying marriage. The ballroom of the Crescent Monarch Hotel glowed gold beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Venice, while a string quartet played softly near the marble staircase. Outside, photographers crowded the entrance beneath flashing cameras and cold November wind. Inside, California's richest families raised champagne glasses worth more than most people's paychecks. And at the center of it all stood Damien Crawford, king of Crawford Holdings, shaking hands like a man running for office instead of celebrating his 6th wedding anniversary. Victoria watched him from the far side of the ballroom with a practiced smile frozen across her face. She wore a silver silk gown that hugged her frame elegantly, though she had spent 40 minutes earlier listening to Damien criticize every dress she tried on. "That one makes your shoulders look broad. Too old. Too desperate." In the end, he barely looked at her anyway. The ice sculpture near the dance floor reflected blue light across the room, while waiters floated past carrying trays of lobster tails and champagne towers. Victoria sat alone at a table designed for 12 people. Empty chairs surrounded her like ghosts. Her fingers rested lightly against the diamond bracelet Damien bought her last Christmas after forgetting her birthday entirely. Across the ballroom, Sabrina Vale laughed at something Damien whispered into her ear. Loud enough for Victoria to hear. Soft enough to feel intentional. Sabrina wore white tonight. Not ivory. Not cream. White. The kind usually reserved for brides. Several investors noticed it too. Victoria caught the glances. The whispers. Nobody said anything because powerful men rewrote social rules around themselves. Damien placed his hand against Sabrina's lower back while introducing her to board members from Seattle. Sabrina smiled like she already owned the building. Victoria stared down into her untouched champagne. The bubbles had disappeared almost an hour ago. Mrs. Crawford? A waiter asked carefully beside her. Would you like another drink? Victoria blinked slowly, realizing she had been staring at the same melting ice cube for nearly 5 minutes. No thank you. The waiter hesitated before lowering his voice. For what it is worth, ma'am, everyone sees it. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Embarrassment always hurt worse when mixed with kindness. Across the room, Damien finally approached her, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored black tuxedo. You disappeared, he said flatly. Victoria almost laughed at the absurdity. I have been sitting here the entire night. Damien ignored the comment and reached for her wine glass instead. You should smile more. Investors are noticing your mood. Your mistress wore white to our anniversary gala. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Not guilt. Irritation. Do not start this here. Victoria looked at him carefully. 6'2". Perfect posture. Silver watch. Calm eyes. Every inch of him looked controlled. Manufactured. Like a luxury brand pretending to be human. Are you in love with her? She asked quietly. Damien gave a small tired sigh, as if she were discussing weather instead of marriage. You are being emotional again. There it was. The phrase he used every time she came too close to the truth. Emotional. Difficult. Exhausting. Too sensitive. He had spent years sanding down her confidence one sentence at a time. Victoria looked toward Sabrina again, just as the younger woman lifted her champagne glass with a tiny victorious smile. Then Victoria noticed something strange near Damien's partially open suit jacket. A folded paper. Official. Thick cream stock. The words visible for only half a second before he adjusted the fabric. Life insurance beneficiary update. Her heartbeat stumbled. Damien followed her eyes immediately and closed his jacket. Too quickly. Too carefully. What was that? She asked. Nothing involving you. Then his phone buzzed. Damien glanced down at the screen, and the coldness in his face vanished instantly. Sabrina's name lit up across the display beside a white heart emoji. Victoria stopped breathing for a moment while Damien typed a response without even pretending to hide it. Around them, the orchestra continued playing while wealthy strangers laughed beneath chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. And for the first time in 6 years, Victoria realized she was not sitting beside the man she married. She was sitting across from someone quietly preparing for a future without her. By December, Sabrina Vale no longer acted like a guest in Victoria Hale's house. She acted like a woman measuring curtains before moving in permanently. The Crawford estate sat high above Malibu with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the Pacific, the kind of property magazines described as timeless elegance for modern royalty. But to Victoria, the house had started feeling cold long before winter arrived. Every room echoed now. Every hallway carried tension like static. Electricity before a storm. Victoria noticed the changes slowly at first. A lipstick stain on a crystal wine glass in Damien's private office. A silk scarf draped carelessly over the piano bench. Blonde hair caught inside the brush in the guest bathroom. Little things. Tiny violations designed to feel accidental. But nothing Sabrina did was accidental. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Victoria walked downstairs barefoot after a migraine kept her in bed most of the morning. The smell of expensive perfume stopped her halfway down the staircase. Jasmine and amber. Sabrina's perfume. Victoria froze. Soft laughter drifted from the kitchen below. She stepped carefully toward the sound and stopped at the doorway. Sabrina sat on the marble counter wearing one of Damien's white button-down shirts loosely tucked into designer jeans while scrolling through her phone like she belonged there. Damien stood beside her pouring espresso into 2 black ceramic cups Victoria herself had imported from Italy during their honeymoon. Oh, Sabrina said brightly when she noticed her. You are home. Victoria looked at Damien first. Not Sabrina. Always Damien. Waiting for him to explain. To deny. To care. He did none of those things. You said you had investor meetings all afternoon, Victoria said quietly. Damien slid one espresso cup towards Sabrina without looking up. Plans changed. Sabrina smiled over the rim of the cup. I hope you do not mind. Damien insisted I stay for lunch. The humiliation landed softly this time. Not loud. Not explosive. Worse. Intimate cruelty always cut deeper because it looked civilized from the outside. Victoria walked toward the refrigerator slowly, trying to steady her breathing. Then she noticed something else. Sabrina was wearing Victoria's cashmere cardigan, the pale gray one her mother gave her before she passed away. Victoria stopped moving entirely. Take that off. Sabrina blinked innocently. This? She touched the sleeve lightly. Damien said I looked cold. Victoria turned toward her husband. You gave her my mother's sweater? Damien finally looked irritated enough to acknowledge the conversation. Victoria, stop turning everything into drama. The word drama again. Always drama whenever she reacted to disrespect. Sabrina slid off the counter gracefully and stepped closer. Honestly, Victoria, you should be thanking me. For what? For staying while Damien works late every night. Silence filled the kitchen. Even the rain against the windows seemed to stop for one long second. Victoria stared at the woman standing in her home, wearing her clothes and speaking like a replacement already approved by the board of directors. Then Damien casually reached into his leather briefcase and placed a thick folder onto the counter between them. Sign these. Victoria looked down. Property transfer documents. Corporate restructuring agreements. Temporary spousal authorization forms connected to Crawford Holdings. 27 pages. What is this? Damien loosened his tie impatiently. Legal housekeeping. Nothing complicated. Victoria picked up the papers carefully. Her eyes moved across the financial language while something cold settled into her chest. If she signed, Damien would gain temporary control over the final shares still registered under her name from the early days of the company. Shares Damien once claimed meant nothing. Shares now worth nearly $18 million. No, she said softly. Damien's face darkened immediately. Excuse me. I said no. Sabrina leaned against the marble island with folded arms, watching like someone enjoying front row seats at a private execution. Damien stepped closer until Victoria could smell whiskey and cedar cologne beneath the tension in the air. Do not make this difficult. Victoria held the papers tighter. Why do you suddenly need my shares? Damien smiled then. Calm again. Too calm. Because I am trying to protect this family. But Victoria noticed something terrifying in his eyes. Not love. Not frustration. Calculation. That night she could not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, she walked downstairs for water and noticed movement through the security monitor mounted near Damien's office. The garage camera was still running. Victoria watched silently as Damien stood beside Sabrina near his Aston Martin, with rain falling outside the open garage door. Sabrina lit a cigarette while Damien spoke low enough that the microphone barely caught the words. Then one sentence crackled clearly through the speaker. She is becoming a problem. Victoria felt her blood turn cold. The invitation to Blackthorn Ridge arrived 2 days later in a cream-colored envelope embossed with Damien Crawford's initials in silver foil. Victoria stared at it across the kitchen island while early morning sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the estate. For a long moment she did not touch it. Her coffee had already gone cold. Outside, waves rolled against the cliffs below the property with the steady rhythm of a countdown clock. Damien entered the kitchen dressed for work in a navy Tom Ford suit, checking emails on his phone without acknowledging her immediately. What is this? Victoria finally asked, lifting the envelope carefully. Damien glanced up. A weekend away. His voice sounded smooth again. Controlled. Like the version of himself he showed investors and reporters. We need time alone. Victoria almost laughed at the absurd timing. 3 months ago, she would have cried with relief hearing those words. Now they sounded rehearsed. Since when? Damien poured himself coffee and walked toward the window overlooking the Pacific. Since I realized we have been under pressure. Pressure. Such a clean word for betrayal. Victoria watched him quietly. And Sabrina? Damien took a slow sip before answering. What about her? Will she be joining us too? That finally earned a reaction. A brief tightening around his jaw. You are exhausting lately. There it was again. Exhausting. Difficult. Emotional. The vocabulary of a man slowly rewriting reality around the woman standing in front of him. Damien set his cup down with deliberate calm. I booked the cabin because I thought maybe we could remember who we used to be before all this paranoia. Victoria wanted to believe him. That was the worst part. Even after the lies, even after seeing Sabrina inside her home and hearing that sentence through the garage security feed, part of her still searched his face for traces of the man she married at 25. The man who once drove 6 hours overnight just to surprise her with pancakes on her birthday. The man who kissed her forehead while building Crawford holdings from a tiny office above a failing print shop downtown. But that version of Damien felt dead now, buried somewhere beneath expensive suits and empty eyes. Blackthorn Ridge is isolated, she said carefully. Exactly. Damien offered a faint smile. No board members. No distractions. Just us. By Friday evening, rain covered the Pacific Coast Highway in silver fog, while Victoria sat silently in the passenger seat of Damien's Range Rover. The drive north felt endless. Pine trees blurred past the windows beneath darkening skies, while soft jazz played low through the speakers. Damien barely spoke for nearly 2 hours. Every few minutes his phone vibrated face down in the center console. He never let Victoria see the screen. Blackthorn Ridge appeared just after sunset. The cabin sat alone near the cliffside surrounded by dense forest and sharp ocean wind. Massive gray rocks overlooked a 70-foot drop into violent black water below. Victoria stepped out of the SUV slowly, wrapping her coat tighter against the freezing air. Something about the place immediately felt wrong. Too quiet. No neighboring cabins. No cell signal. Just waves crashing far below and the distant groan of thunder over the ocean. Inside, the cabin looked beautiful in the way expensive places often do. Stone fireplace, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the cliffs. Damien poured bourbon into crystal glasses while Victoria wandered toward the hallway. Then she stopped moving. Voices, low, muffled, coming from outside near the rear deck. Victoria stepped closer carefully, her pulse beginning to rise. Sabrina's voice carried through the storm first. This needs to happen tonight. Victoria froze instantly. Then Damien answered. Calm. Cold. After this, the shares transfer automatically. Her blood turned to ice. Sabrina lowered her voice, but the wind carried enough words through the cracked doorway. And the insurance? 12 million. Silence followed. Heavy. Permanent. Victoria backed away slowly, one trembling step at a time. Her breathing collapsed. Into panic. She grabbed her coat from the chair near the fireplace and moved toward the front door without thinking. Behind her, the deck door suddenly opened hard against the wall. Victoria. Damien's voice echoed through the cabin. She ran into the storm. The ocean swallowed Victoria Hale before the scream fully left her throat. Ice-cold water slammed against her body hard enough to steal every breath from her lungs while darkness spun around her like shattered glass. For several terrifying seconds there was no sky, no cliff, no Damien, only freezing black water pulling her deeper beneath the storm. Then instinct took over. Victoria fought upward blindly through violent waves until her head finally broke the surface. Air tore into her chest. Rain hammered her face while thunder exploded somewhere above the cliffs. She coughed hard, barely able to see through the freezing water crashing around her. Blackthorn Ridge towered high overhead like a jagged shadow against the storm. No lights appeared at the edge. No one shouted her name. Damien was not coming back. The realization hurt worse than the cold. Victoria grabbed onto a cluster of wet rocks near the shoreline, just as another wave slammed into her shoulder. Pain shot through her body. Her left ankle burned. Her palms scraped raw against stone while she dragged herself onto a narrow strip of jagged beach beneath the cliffs. Then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes again, pale morning light filtered through fog rolling across the Pacific. Her body felt heavy. Wrong. Every breath ached. For several long seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then flashes returned all at once. Damien. Sabrina. The insurance policy. The cliff. Victoria forced herself upright slowly against the rocks, shivering uncontrollably. Her wedding ring was gone. Blood mixed with seawater along her sleeve where sharp stone had cut through the fabric of her coat. Above her, Seagulls circled beneath gray skies while waves crashed endlessly against the shoreline. The world had continued without her overnight. Somewhere above those cliffs, Damien Crawford was probably already rehearsing grief for reporters. Victoria tried, standing but collapsed immediately as pain shot through her ankle. Panic rose hard inside her chest. No phone, no signal, no road. The beach stretched nearly empty for miles except for broken driftwood and dark ocean water. Then she heard it. A boat engine. Small. Distant. Victoria pushed herself onto one elbow and screamed until her throat burned raw. At first nothing happened. Then the sound grew louder. A weathered fishing boat emerged slowly through the fog while an older man in a red jacket scanned the shoreline. Jesus Christ, he muttered after spotting her near the rocks. 2 hours later, Victoria sat wrapped in thick blankets inside a small emergency clinic nearly 40 miles south of Blackthorn Ridge. A nurse adjusted the heating pads around her shoulders while doctors checked her injuries under harsh fluorescent lights. Minor fractures. Severe exhaustion. Mild hypothermia. Nothing fatal. Not anymore. You are lucky to be alive, the doctor said quietly. Victoria stared at the ceiling in silence. Lucky did not feel like the right word. 3 days later, every major news station in California carried the same headline. Missing philanthropist presumed dead after tragic fall. Photos of Damien Crawford standing near the coastline in a black wool coat flooded television screens nationwide. Reporters described him as devastated, heartbroken, a grieving husband cooperating fully with authorities. Victoria watched the coverage silently from a hospital room registered under a false name after panic attacks left her unable to sleep through the night. Damien cried during one interview. Actual tears. Victoria was my entire world. He told cameras outside the courthouse in Los Angeles while Sabrina stood behind him in dark sunglasses pretending to mourn. Victoria turned off the television immediately afterward and vomited into the sink. Weeks passed, then months. Physical therapy became part of her life. So did silence. Victoria barely recognized herself anymore. Stress and trauma stripped weight from her rapidly during recovery, while short dark hair slowly replaced the long blonde waves Damien once controlled down to the color. The woman staring back from the rehabilitation center mirror looked sharper now. Harder. Like someone carved from survival instead of comfort. One snowy January morning, a nurse handed Victoria an envelope with no return address. Inside sat a black business card embossed with silver lettering. Ethan Mercer. Mercer Capital. Beneath the name was a handwritten sentence. I know what Damien Crawford did to you. Victoria stopped breathing. Then she turned the card over slowly and found one final line written across the back in clean, precise handwriting. And I have been waiting 7 years to destroy him. The first time Victoria Hale met Ethan Mercer face to face, she almost walked out of the restaurant. Not because she was afraid of him, because he looked like the kind of man Damien Crawford used to become nervous around. Ethan sat alone near the back corner of a quiet seafood restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay in Seattle, dressed in a charcoal sweater and dark jeans instead of the expensive suits usually worn by billionaires trying to impress people. Rain slid slowly across the windows behind him while soft jazz drifted through the nearly empty dining room. He stood when Victoria approached the table, his sharp gray eyes studying her carefully for one silent moment. You look different, he said calmly. Victoria lowered herself into the chair across from him. That is what surviving does to people. Ethan nodded once like he understood that answer too well. For several minutes, neither of them touched the menus sitting between them. Victoria noticed small details immediately. The scar along Ethan's wrist. The exhaustion beneath his eyes. The fact that he kept glancing toward exits like someone who had spent years expecting betrayal. Finally, he slid a thick black folder across the table toward her. Open it. Victoria hesitated before lifting the cover slowly. Inside were photographs. Offshore account statements. Corporate transfer records. Confidential legal filings connected to Crawford Holdings. Page after page after page. Enough financial corruption to bury entire companies. Her pulse quickened. Where did you get this? Ethan leaned back slightly. 7 years ago, Damien Crawford destroyed my firm during a merger negotiation. His voice remained controlled, but something dark moved beneath the surface. He manipulated stock prices, bribed one of my executives, then blamed my company for the collapse. Victoria stared down at the paperwork while rain tapped softly against the glass. Why did no one expose him? Ethan gave a humorless smile. Because powerful men rarely fall the first time. Victoria turned another page and froze. Security logs. Timestamp records from Blackthorn Ridge. Someone had attempted to erase surveillance activity from the weekend she disappeared. Her hands tightened around the paper. You hacked his systems? No. Ethan replied quietly. Someone inside Crawford Holdings started leaking information 3 months ago. Victoria looked up sharply. Who? Ethan studied her carefully before answering. I think Sabrina Vale realized Damien would eventually betray her too. Silence settled heavily between them. Victoria remembered Sabrina standing beside the cliff in her white coat while the storm swallowed everything. Why help me? She asked finally. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. Because Damien Crawford destroys people for sport. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small flash drive onto the table. And because the woman he tried to erase survived long enough to become a problem. Over the next several months, Victoria disappeared completely from public life. Officially, she was still presumed dead. Unofficially, she rebuilt herself piece by piece inside Ethan Mercer's private estate outside Seattle overlooking Puget Sound. Physical therapy became combat training for her mind. Every morning started before sunrise with long runs through freezing rain along the waterfront trails despite the lingering pain in her ankle. Every afternoon, Ethan taught her how to read financial structures, hidden shell corporations, and offshore laundering systems connected to Crawford Holdings. Every night, she studied legal depositions until her eyes burned from exhaustion. Somewhere along the way, fear slowly turned into focus. Victoria cut her hair shorter, stopped wearing soft colors, stopped apologizing before speaking. The mirror eventually reflected someone Damien Crawford would no longer recognize. One evening, Ethan entered the study carrying a tablet while thunder rolled across the Seattle skyline outside. You need to see this. Victoria looked up from a stack of legal files. On the screen appeared a live interview from Los Angeles. Damien stood beside Sabrina at a charity fundraiser downtown, with cameras flashing around them. Sabrina wore a diamond necklace Victoria once picked out herself in Milan. After a difficult year, Damien told reporters smoothly, I am grateful to have found peace again. Then he placed his hand gently over Sabrina's fingers while photographers exploded into applause. Victoria felt something inside her go completely still. Not heartbreak anymore. Not grief. Something colder. Ethan watched her carefully across the room. Say the word, he said quietly, and we bury him. Victoria stared at Damien Crawford smiling beneath flashing cameras, while rain hammered the windows outside like distant applause. Then she reached for the flash drive beside her coffee cup and finally smiled for the first time in months. No, she said softly. First we let him feel safe. 1 year after the world buried Victoria Hale, Damien Crawford decided to celebrate. The Winter Hearts Foundation Gala occupied the entire top floor of the Aurora Grand Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, a $40 million glass tower glowing above the city skyline like a diamond suspended in darkness. Valets rushed across rain-soaked pavement, while photographers shouted celebrity names beneath flashing white lights. Inside, champagne fountains sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, and a live orchestra played soft jazz for California's wealthiest families. Every major business network covered the event live because Damien Crawford was expected to make a personal announcement before midnight. Rumors had already spread across social media for weeks. Engagement, merger, political ambitions. Nobody knew for certain, but everyone came anyway. Damien stood near the center of the ballroom in a custom black tuxedo surrounded by investors, politicians, and luxury influencers pretending to laugh at his jokes. 1 year had polished him perfectly. More interviews, more charity work, more headlines about resilience after tragedy. The grieving widower image had transformed him into something almost untouchable. Beside him, Sabrina Vale wore a silver gown with diamonds wrapped around her throat like frozen stars. Cameras adored her. She had learned quickly how to stand beside power without looking intimidated by it. Smile softer, she whispered quietly while another photographer snapped pictures. You look arrogant. Damien adjusted his cufflink calmly. Arrogance only bothers poor people. Sabrina laughed softly while touching the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. Victoria's necklace. The one from Milan. The same necklace Damien claimed was stolen after the accident at Blackthorn Ridge. Across the ballroom, giant projection screens displayed looping footage of the foundation's charity work, while donors sipped 20-year-old scotch beneath floating candlelight. Everything looked flawless, carefully managed, controlled, until the lights flickered. At first, nobody reacted. The orchestra continued playing while guests glanced upward briefly at the chandeliers. Then the music cut out entirely. Silence rolled slowly across the ballroom, like fog moving over water. Damien frowned toward the production booth near the stage. "What is happening?" he muttered. A second later, the massive ballroom doors opened. Cold night air swept inside, carrying the scent of rain and ocean wind. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. High heels clicked slowly against marble floors. One step at a time. Measured. Controlled. Victoria Hale walked into the ballroom, wearing a black tailored suit beneath a long ivory coat, while stunned silence swallowed the entire room whole. Her shorter dark hair framed sharp features no longer softened by apology or fear. She looked thinner now, stronger somehow, like surviving had carved something dangerous into her bones. Damien's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Sabrina's face drained completely of color beneath the ballroom lights. "Impossible," she whispered. Victoria stopped 20 feet away from them beneath the frozen glow of crystal chandeliers and flashing cameras. Her expression never changed. "No," she said calmly. "Just inconvenient for you." The ballroom exploded into chaos instantly. Reporters surged forward shouting questions while investors stared at Damien Crawford like strangers suddenly realizing they had been shaking hands with a ghost. Several women near the stage covered their mouths in disbelief. One man dropped his whiskey glass entirely. Damien looked physically unsteady for the first time in his adult life. "Victoria," his voice cracked around her name. "How are you here?" Victoria tilted her head slightly while photographers captured every second. "You should know better than anyone," she answered quietly. "You were there when I fell." Silence hit harder than screaming ever could. Sabrina stepped backward instinctively. Damien's face went pale beneath the ballroom lights, while whispers spread through the crowd faster than fire through dry grass. "Murder. Insurance. Blackthorn Ridge." Cameras flashed violently now. Victoria slowly removed a pair of black leather gloves while never taking her eyes off Damien Crawford. "Tell me something," she said softly enough that the entire ballroom leaned closer to hear. "Did you ever actually love me?" Her gaze drifted briefly toward the shattered champagne glass at his feet. "Or was I just easier to bury than divorce?" The silence inside the Aurora Grand Ballroom lasted exactly 4 seconds before Damien Crawford tried to regain control. "Everyone calm down," he said sharply, forcing a smile toward the crowd while cameras continued flashing nonstop. "Victoria has clearly been through something traumatic." Traumatic. Victoria almost admired how quickly he reached for manipulation instead of remorse. She stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, while reporters pushed closer around the ballroom stage. Sabrina remained frozen beside Damien, one trembling hand still wrapped around the diamond necklace at her throat. "You told the world I was dead," Victoria said calmly. Damien stepped toward her carefully like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Victoria, please. We can talk privately." Privately. Her voice stayed soft. Controlled. Dangerous. "That is interesting coming from a man who tried to turn my funeral into a media campaign." Gasps rippled through the ballroom immediately. Damien's expression hardened beneath the pressure of 100 watching eyes. "That is enough," he snapped quietly. "You are confused." Victoria smiled for the first time all night. Cold. Precise. "No, Damien. For the first time in 6 years, I finally see everything clearly." The giant projection screens behind the ballroom stage suddenly flickered black. Damien turned instantly toward the production booth. "Turn that off," he barked. Too late. A security video appeared across all 3 massive screens overhead. Timestamped. Blackthorn Ridge. Heavy rain blurred the footage while Damien's Range Rover sat parked near the cliffside cabin. Guests leaned closer instinctively. Then audio crackled through the ballroom speakers. Sabrina's voice. Clear. "This needs to happen tonight." Another voice followed immediately afterward. "Damien. Calm. Emotionless. After this, the shares transfer automatically." A wave of shocked whispers exploded across the ballroom. Damien's face lost all remaining color. "This is edited," he said quickly. "This is fake." But Victoria was already walking slowly toward the stage. "Should we continue?" she asked quietly. Another video replaced the first. Offshore banking transfers. Hidden shell corporations. Bribery payments connected to Crawford holdings. Federal tax violations. Deleted surveillance logs from Blackthorn Ridge recovered by cybersecurity investigators. Every secret Damien spent years burying now glowed 30 feet high above California's elite. Investors in the front rows began pulling out phones immediately. Several board members backed away from Damien, like physical proximity itself had become dangerous. Sabrina stared at the screens in complete horror. "You said those files were destroyed?" she whispered under her breath. Victoria heard it. So did every microphone still broadcasting live across the ballroom. Damien turned toward Sabrina slowly. "You recorded me." Sabrina stepped backward instinctively, tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought if something happened to me someday, I would need protection." The room erupted again. Reporters practically climbed over each other chasing reactions, while security guards struggled to control the crowd near the stage. Then another voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents." The ballroom doors opened hard. 3 FBI agents entered alongside financial crime investigators from the California Attorney General's office. Conversations died instantly. Damien looked stunned for the first time in his life. One agent approached calmly holding a sealed warrant folder. "Damien Alexander Crawford," he said clearly. "You are under investigation for financial fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Camera flashes exploded so rapidly the ballroom looked trapped inside a lightning storm. Damien turned toward Victoria desperately now, no longer polished or composed, just frightened. "Victoria, listen to me," he said, reaching toward her arm. "I can explain everything." She stepped backward before he could touch her. The movement looked small to everyone else in the room. But to Victoria, it felt like cutting the final chain still attached to her old life. Damien froze completely. For one painful second, he looked exactly like the man she married years ago. Lost. Human. Too late. Victoria stared at him beneath the shattered glow of flashing cameras, while FBI agents closed in around the ballroom. "The night you let go of my hand," she said softly. "I finally let go of loving you." Nobody in the room spoke after that. Even the reporters fell silent while Damien Crawford stood surrounded by cameras, federal agents, and the ruins of the empire he once believed made him untouchable. And somewhere high above Los Angeles, rain began falling against the ballroom windows exactly the same way it had the night Victoria Hale survived the fall he thought would erase her forever. 6 months later, the Crawford empire existed only in headlines and courtroom evidence boxes. The giant silver letters once hanging above Crawford Holdings headquarters had been removed after federal investigators seized the building in downtown Los Angeles. News helicopters circled overhead for days, while former executives carried cardboard boxes through crowds of reporters beneath gray winter skies. Every business channel in America replayed the same footage repeatedly. Damien Crawford entering federal court without bodyguards, without confidence, without the smile that once sold billion-dollar deals. Public opinion turned on him with terrifying speed. Investors abandoned him first. Friends disappeared second. By the time prosecutors officially filed conspiracy and fraud charges, Damien no longer looked like one of California's untouchable elite. He looked tired, older somehow, like fear had hollowed him out from the inside. Sabrina Vale vanished from social media almost overnight. No more luxury vacations. No more interviews. Paparazzi eventually photographed her leaving a small apartment building in Miami wearing oversized sunglasses and trying not to be recognized. The diamond necklace from Milan never appeared again. Victoria Hale watched none of it live. She stopped following the coverage weeks earlier. Some endings no longer needed witnesses. Rain fell softly across Seattle one quiet February morning, while Victoria stood inside a renovated brick building overlooking Puget Sound. Sunlight spilled through tall industrial windows across polished wood floors and pale cream walls. Workers carried in furniture while volunteers unpacked books and framed photographs near the reception desk. A brass plaque beside the entrance reads simply, "The Harbor Foundation. Support for survivors of emotional abuse and financial control." Victoria traced her fingertips lightly across the engraved letters while distant seagulls cried over the waterfront outside. You built all this in 6 months, Ethan Mercer said from behind her. Victoria turned slightly. Ethan stood near the doorway holding 2 coffee cups while snow melted slowly against the shoulders of his dark coat. I had help, she answered softly. Ethan handed her one of the cups carefully. Most people would have disappeared after everything that happened. Victoria looked out the window, toward the gray water beyond the city. Skyline. I almost did. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not empty. Peaceful. The kind of silence that no longer demanded survival. Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking again. Damien requested a settlement meeting yesterday. Victoria gave a small, humorless smile. Of course he did. His attorneys say he wants closure. That word almost made her laugh. Closure. As if betrayal could be folded neatly into paperwork and filed away forever. Victoria walked slowly toward her office where stacks of unopened donations waited beside fresh flowers volunteers had delivered earlier that morning. On the desk sat one final object from her old life. A photograph from her wedding day. Victoria at 25 smiling beside Damien beneath California sunlight, with absolute trust shining in her eyes. She stared at the picture quietly for several seconds before opening the desk drawer and placing it inside. Then she closed the drawer gently without another glance. No meeting, she said calmly. Ethan nodded once. Understood. That evening, Victoria drove alone toward the Pacific coastline north of Seattle, while cold ocean wind rolled across the cliffs beneath fading orange skies. The beach below stretched empty except for waves crashing endlessly against dark rocks. She stood near the edge wrapped in a long cream coat, while gulls drifted through the evening air overhead. 1 year ago, another cliff nearly became her grave. Tonight, the ocean sounded different somehow. Softer. Victoria slipped her hands into her coat pockets and breathed in the cold, salt air deeply. No fear. No cameras. No Damien Crawford. Just silence and the steady rhythm of water against stone. Somewhere behind her, the world still talked about scandal, revenge, and the billionaire who lost everything. But out there beneath the fading sunset, none of it mattered anymore. Victoria looked toward the horizon while wind moved gently through her shorter dark hair. Then she smiled almost imperceptibly and whispered the one thing Damien Crawford would never understand. You did not destroy me. You introduced me to the woman I was forced to become. The waves carried the words into the darkness below, while night slowly swallowed the coastline whole. And far away in a federal holding cell, a man who once believed power could erase consequences finally understood the price of underestimating a woman who survived him.